The morning sun filtered through the Venetian blinds of Karoline Leavitt's apartment as she sipped her coffee and reviewed her notes. Today was important. After months of back-and-forth arguments on social media, she would finally face Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett in person on American Discourse, the most watched political talk show in the country. Karoline checked her watch. 3 hours until she needed to be at the studio. She walked to her closet and selected a navy blue blazer and matching skirt. Professional, but not stuffy. Strong, but not intimidating. Every detail mattered when millions would be watching. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Olivia. "Knock 'em dead today, the whole office is planning to watch." Karoline smiled and texted back a simple, "Thanks," before returning to her preparation. She had spent weeks researching Jasmine Crockett's voting record, public statements, and policy positions. Karoline knew that the Congresswoman was skilled at turning conversations her way and making opponents look foolish. But not today. Not if Karoline could help it. Across town, Jasmine Crockett was also preparing for the show. Her spacious office in the federal building hummed with activity as her team moved around her. "We've prepared responses for all the likely topics," said Sam Collins, her press secretary, handing her a folder. "The economy, healthcare reform, and the border situation will probably come up first." Jasmine nodded. At 43, she had become one of the most recognizable faces in Congress. Known for her sharp tongue and quick thinking, she rarely lost debates, especially on television. She looked at the photo of Karoline Leavitt on her briefing papers. Young, ambitious, and increasingly popular with conservative viewers. An up-and-comer who needed to be put in her place. "What's her weak spot?" Jasmine asked, tapping Karoline's photo. "Inexperience," replied Sam without hesitation. "She's only been in the public eye for 2 years. Before that, she was just a policy researcher. She hasn't been in the trenches like you have." Jasmine smiled. "That's what we'll focus on then. By the time we're done, everyone will see she's out of her depth." At the television studio, the production team for American Discourse rushed to prepare for the evening's show. Lisa Morgan, the executive producer, gathered the staff for a quick meeting. "Tonight is going to be big," she told them. Excitement, clear in her voice. "The online buzz is already crazy. Leavitt versus Crockett. I want perfect lighting, perfect sound, and cameras ready to catch every reaction. Greg needs to be prepped on how to control things if it gets too heated." Greg Peters, the show's silver-haired host for the past 12 years, looked up from his notes. "I can handle them," he said confidently. "But I agree. This could be our highest-rated show this year." "The audience is already lining up outside," added Donna Ray, the audience coordinator. "We had to turn people away. Everyone wants to see this showdown in person." By late afternoon, both Karoline and Jasmine had arrived at the studio. They were taken to separate green rooms to prevent any interaction before the show. The makeup, artists, and wardrobe people fussed over them, making sure they looked perfect for the high-definition cameras. In her green room, Karoline paced slowly, reviewing key points in her mind. She wasn't nervous exactly, but she felt the weight of the moment. This appearance could either boost her career or set it back significantly. A production assistant named Ryan knocked on her door. "Ms. Leavitt, 20 minutes until we go live." "Thank you," she replied. "Could I have some water, please?" As Ryan left to get her water, Karoline's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from her father. "Remember what I always told you, speak the truth clearly and don't let anyone rattle you. Proud of you, sweetheart." The simple message calmed her. She took a deep breath and straightened her blazer. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat perfectly still as a makeup artist added final touches to her face. Her mind was already in debate mode, anticipating questions and planning responses. Unlike Karoline, Jasmine had a team with her, Sam Collins and 2 other advisors, who whispered suggestions and reminders. "Remember to mention the Henderson bill when economy comes up," said one advisor named Carol. "Your work on that legislation polls very well. And if she brings up the border situation, pivot to the funding issue," added Sam. "Don't let her control the narrative." Jasmine nodded slightly, careful not to disrupt the makeup artist's work. "I know how to handle her," she said confidently. 10 minutes before showtime, Greg Peters came to greet each guest separately. He stopped at Karoline's room first. "Ms. Leavitt, good to have you on the show," he said warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Peters," Karoline replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Just so you know how things will go, we'll start with opening statements, 2 minutes each. Then I'll guide the discussion through several topics. If things get heated, I may have to cut in. Nothing personal, just keeping the show on track." "Understood completely." Greg then visited Jasmine, going through the same routine. She greeted him like an old friend, having been on his show multiple times before. "Big crowd tonight, Jasmine," he told her. "They're excited to see you two face off." "Well, we wouldn't want to disappoint them, would we?" she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At exactly 8 p.m., the American Discourse theme music played throughout the studio. The audience applauded as Greg Peters walked onto the stage. "Good evening, America," he began, looking directly into the main camera. "Tonight, we bring you a conversation that many have been waiting for. Two women with very different visions for America's future, meeting face to face for the first time." The audience clapped again as he continued. "Please, welcome Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and political commentator Karoline Leavitt." The studio erupted in applause and some cheers as both women walked onto the stage from opposite sides. They shook hands briefly in the middle, their smiles professional but cold, before taking their seats on either side of Greg. "Thank you both for being here," Greg said. "Let's begin with opening statements. Congresswoman Crockett, as our elected official, you may go first." Jasmine leaned slightly toward her microphone. "Thank you, Greg. And thank you to the viewers at home who care enough about our country's future to watch shows like this." She spoke confidently, outlining her vision for America, one that she described as inclusive, forward-thinking, and based on real-world experience. Without directly attacking Karoline, she emphasized her own years of service and the importance of having qualified, experienced leaders making decisions. When it was Karoline's turn, she thanked Greg and acknowledged Jasmine's service before, pivoting to her own message. "Experience matters," Karoline said, "but so does having the right ideas and the courage to stand by them. Sometimes fresh perspectives are exactly what we need, especially when the experienced politicians have led us down paths that aren't working for everyday Americans." As the opening statements concluded, Greg Peters introduced the first topic: the economy. The real debate was about to begin. The bright studio lights felt warm as Karoline prepared her thoughts. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, sense their curiosity and expectations. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett sat with perfect posture, a slight smile playing at her lips. She looked completely at ease, like a professor about to correct a student's mistake. The first real clash was moments away. Neither woman realized just how memorable this night would become, or how a single exchange would soon captivate the nation. "Let's dive into our first topic," Greg Peters said, adjusting his notes. "The economy. Unemployment is down, but inflation remains a concern for many Americans. Congresswoman Crockett, your thoughts on the current economic situation?" Jasmine leaned forward confidently. "The numbers speak for themselves, Greg. We've created over 2 million jobs in the past year alone. Yes, prices have gone up in some sectors, but that's part of a global trend that every country is dealing with. Our policies have cushioned that blow while maintaining growth." She turned slightly toward Karoline. "What some critics fail to understand is that economic policy isn't as simple as the talking points they memorize. It requires nuance and understanding of complex systems." Greg nodded and turned to Karoline. "Ms. Leavitt, your response?" Karoline smiled politely. "With respect, Congresswoman, I think the millions of Americans struggling to afford groceries and gas understand the economy quite well. They don't need complex explanations for why their dollar buys less than it did 2 years ago." She cited several statistics about rising costs for housing, food, and energy. These aren't just numbers on a page. They represent real hardships for families, and they're the direct result of policies that the Congresswoman has supported, the audience murmured. A few people clapped. Jasmine's smile tightened. "Those are oversimplifications. The bill you're referring to addressed multiple issues, not just economic ones. And the inflation we're seeing began before that legislation was even introduced. Then why did your office predict it would lower inflation when you voted for it? Karoline asked. That's what you told your constituents. Before Jasmine could respond, Greg jumped in. Let's move to our next topic, healthcare. The Wilkins-Moore Healthcare Act has been in effect for 6 months now. Congresswoman, you were a vocal supporter. Has it lived up to expectations? Jasmine welcomed the change of subject. Absolutely. Over 5 million previously uninsured Americans now have coverage. We're seeing lower prescription drug prices for seniors. These are real achievements. But emergency room wait times have increased by 40%, Karoline countered. And many rural hospitals are struggling with the new payment structure. Some may close. Change takes time, Jasmine replied smoothly. Any major reform has adjustment periods. What's your alternative? Go back to a system where insurance companies could deny coverage for pre-existing conditions? That's not what I'm suggesting, and you know it, Karoline said firmly. There are ways to expand coverage without creating the bureaucratic nightmare this bill has become. Doctors are spending more time on paperwork than with patients. The debate continued this way through several more topics. Each woman held her ground. Jasmine relied on her experience and insider knowledge, frequently mentioning committee meetings and conversations with experts that Karoline wouldn't have been part of. Karoline focused on results and impacts on everyday people, challenging the effectiveness of Jasmine's preferred policies. The audience seemed evenly split, with supporters on both sides occasionally applauding points they agreed with. Greg Peters kept the conversation moving, asking questions about education, crime, and foreign policy. An hour into the show, during a discussion about government spending, Jasmine began to show signs of frustration. Karoline had just pointed out a contradiction between the Congresswoman's recent statements and her voting record. The fact is, Karoline said, you voted for increased spending in 7 consecutive budgets while telling voters back home you were fighting to cut wasteful government programs. Jasmine's usually composed expression faltered. That's a gross mischaracterization of complex budget negotiations. The final bills included many priorities from both parties. But you voted yes, Karoline pressed. You can't claim to fight against something and then vote for it when it matters. Politics requires compromise, Jasmine said, her voice taking on a slightly condescending tone. Something you might understand if you'd ever actually served in government instead of just criticizing from the sidelines. The audience reacted with a collective, ooh. Greg Peters raised his eyebrows but said nothing, allowing the moment to play out. Karoline remained calm, though those watching closely might have noticed her grip tighten slightly on her pen. I think the voters understand compromise, Congresswoman. What they don't understand is saying one thing on camera and doing the opposite when you vote. Jasmine shook her head dismissively. Again, these are complex issues that can't be reduced to simple yes or no positions. Those of us who work in Washington dealing with real policy rather than sound bites understand that. During the next commercial break, the tension remained thick. Both women sipped water and reviewed notes, not speaking to each other. Greg conferred with a producer who had walked onto the set. Keep an eye on this, the producer, Lisa Morgan, whispered to Greg. The personal attacks are starting. Ratings are through the roof, but don't let it get out of hand. Greg nodded. I've got it under control. When they returned from the break, Greg introduced a new segment. We've asked each of our guests to respond to a recent statement from the other. Ms. Leavitt, last week Congresswoman Crockett said your policy proposals show a fundamental misunderstanding of how government works. Your response? Karoline nodded. I heard that comment. And I think it reveals something important about how the Congresswoman views government. She sees it as complicated, something ordinary citizens can't understand without special insider knowledge. She paused before continuing. I see government differently. I believe it should be transparent and accountable to the people it serves. If policies are so complex that voters can't understand them, maybe that's the problem, not the voters. Some audience members applauded. Jasmine smiled tightly. Congresswoman, your chance to respond, Greg said. Government is complex because the problems it addresses are complex, Jasmine replied. Healthcare, climate change, national security. These aren't simple issues with bumper sticker solutions. I've spent years working on these problems, and yes, that gives me insights that someone without that experience wouldn't have. She looked directly at Karoline. Your proposals sound nice in theory, but they ignore political and practical realities. That's not a personal attack. It's a fact based on your lack of experience in actually governing. The atmosphere in the studio grew increasingly tense. Even Greg seemed unsure how to steer the conversation back to policy rather than personal credentials. Let's move on to another topic, he began, but Jasmine wasn't finished. Your understanding of how government actually functions seems limited to what you've read in textbooks, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Those of us who work in Washington know the reality is quite different. The studio fell silent. Even Greg Peters, known for his unflappable demeanor, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The camera panned to Karoline, who remained still for a moment, her eyes fixed on Jasmine. Then, with perfect composure, she straightened her posture and leaned slightly forward. The audience held its breath, sensing that whatever came next would be significant. Behind the cameras, producer Lisa Morgan whispered to her assistant, "Are you getting this? Make sure we have all the angles covered." In the control room, the director quickly instructed the camera operators. Camera 3, tight on Leavitt. Camera 2, get Crockett's reaction. This is going to be good. The tension stretched for several seconds as Karoline gathered her thoughts. Even Jasmine seemed to realize she might have crossed a line, but it was too late to take back her words. The stage was set for Karoline's response, one that would soon have the entire studio, and later, the nation, talking. "Congresswoman," Karoline began, her voice calm but resonant in the silent studio. "I find it interesting that you'd mention textbooks, considering your voting record contradicts basic economic principles taught in those very books." The audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. Greg Peters sat perfectly still, sensing that any interruption would break the spell of this moment. "Let me be specific," Karoline continued, opening a folder she had kept beside her. "Last year you voted for the Burton Amendment, which increased government spending by 12%, while claiming it would somehow reduce inflation. Any first-year economics student could tell you that's not how inflation works." She flipped to another page. 3 months ago, you called the Nelson bill fiscally responsible, even though the Congressional Budget Office projected it would add $300 billion to the deficit. Is that the Washington reality you're so proud to understand, Jasmine? Tried to interject. Those projections don't account for. "I'm not finished," Karoline said firmly, surprising everyone with her assertiveness. "You've spent the last hour questioning my understanding of how government works. Now I'm questioning whether your experience has taught you anything about how government should work." The audience erupted in applause and gasps. A woman in the front row covered her mouth in shock. A man stood up briefly before sitting back down. "For all your experience," Karoline pressed on, "your district has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state. The infrastructure project you promised voters 5 years ago is still unfinished and over budget. The education initiative you championed has shown no improvement in test scores." She closed her folder and looked directly at Jasmine. "Perhaps if you spent less time dismissing others' knowledge and more time reflecting on the actual impact of your decisions on every day, Americans, your approval ratings wouldn't be at historic lows. The people don't need Washington insiders telling them what reality is. They're living it every day because of votes like yours." The studio exploded with reactions. Several audience members jumped to their feet, applauding or simply reacting to the intensity of the moment. Others sat in stunned silence. The cameras caught it all, the standing ovations, the shocked expressions, and most importantly, Jasmine Crockett's face, as she struggled to maintain her composure. Greg Peters, visibly stunned himself, fumbled with his notes. Well, let's give the Congresswoman a chance to respond." Behind the scenes, the control room was chaos. "Did she just say that?" exclaimed Lisa Morgan, the executive producer. "This is television gold. Social media is already blowing up," reported a young assistant who was monitoring online reactions. "The clip is being shared everywhere." On stage, Jasmine Crockett took a deep breath. For the first time in her career, she seemed genuinely rattled. Her usual eloquence had abandoned her. That's a mischaracterization of my record, she finally managed. The economic situations you're describing are far more nuanced than you're suggesting. Her response lacked her usual confidence. She spoke in generalities rather than addressing Karoline's specific points. My constituents know my commitment to them. One debate performance doesn't change years of service. Karoline nodded politely, but said nothing more. She didn't need to. The damage was done. Greg Peters, sensing the shift in momentum, tried to regain control of the show. Let's move to our next topic, which is education reform. But the energy in the room had changed dramatically. For the remainder of the segment, Jasmine was noticeably more cautious in her responses. Her answers became shorter, less dismissive. She avoided any further personal attacks on Karoline's experience. Karoline, meanwhile, maintained her composure. She didn't gloat or press her advantage. She simply continued to make her points clearly and directly, now with the audience hanging on her every word. In the audience, people whispered to each other. "Did you see Crockett's face?" a man named Frank murmured to his wife. "I've never seen her speechless before." Leavitt came prepared, his wife replied. She had those facts ready to go. She was just waiting for the right moment. Near the back of the studio, a college student named Alicia was rapidly texting her friends. "Watching history happen right now," she typed. "Crockett just got destroyed on live TV." As the debate continued, the dynamic had clearly shifted. When Jasmine spoke, the audience seemed less engaged. When Karoline spoke, they leaned forward in their seats. The producers, sensing this energy, instructed camera operators to capture more audience reactions. During the next commercial break, both women stayed in their seats. Staff brought them fresh water and touched up their makeup. Jasmine consulted, briefly with Sam Collins, who had rushed to the edge of the stage. "Don't try to address what just happened," Sam advised quickly. "Move forward. Focus on your strengths for the remaining segments." Jasmine nodded, her expression grim. Across the stage, Karoline sat quietly, reviewing her notes. A production assistant named Ryan gave her a subtle thumbs up when no one was looking. When the show returned from break, Greg introduced their final topic, national security. "Congresswoman Crockett, you serve on the House Defense Committee. What do you see as our nation's biggest security challenge right now?" Jasmine answered competently, discussing various global threats and defense priorities. She spoke with more authority on this topic, clearly in her comfort zone. The audience listened respectfully. When it was Karoline's turn, she acknowledged Jasmine's expertise in this area. "The Congresswoman raises valid points about our military readiness. Where I differ is on how we prioritize threats and allocate resources." She outlined a different approach, emphasizing cybersecurity and economic security alongside traditional military concerns. She was respectful but firm in presenting her alternative view. As the final segment wrapped up, Greg Peters asked each woman for closing statements. "Congresswoman, would you like to go first?" Jasmine nodded and gathered herself. "Tonight we've discussed many important issues facing our nation. Some moments were more heated than others, but that's the nature of democracy. Passionate debate about ideas that matter." She continued with practiced eloquence, thanking the audience and viewers at home. She emphasized her years of service and commitment to her constituents. She was professional, but something had changed. The easy confidence from the beginning of the show was gone. When it was Karoline's turn, she smiled warmly at the audience. "I want to thank Congresswoman Crockett for this debate. Despite our differences, I believe we both want what's best for America. We just have different ideas about how to get there." She spoke about bringing fresh perspectives to old problems and the importance of holding elected officials accountable. "Experience matters," she concluded, "but so do results. The American people deserve both." As the show's theme music played and Greg thanked both guests, the audience gave a standing ovation. Many seemed to be looking specifically at Karoline as they applauded. Behind the scenes, network executives were already calling the control room. Clips from the show were spreading across social media platforms, News outlets were reaching out for permission to air excerpts. Lisa Morgan, the executive producer, was already planning the follow-up coverage. "We need to book Leavitt again," she told her team, "and reach out to political analysts for reaction segments tomorrow." As the studio lights dimmed and the audience began filing out, the impact of what had just happened was only beginning to take shape. Karoline Leavitt's comeback would soon be replayed on news channels, discussed on radio shows, and analyzed by political commentators across the country. The night's broadcast was over, but the story was just getting started. The morning after the debate, Karoline Leavitt woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop with notifications. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes, and picked up the device. There were hundreds of text messages, thousands of new social media followers, and dozens of missed calls from news outlets seeking interviews. One message from her friend Olivia stood out. "OMG, you're trending #1 nationwide. Turn on any news channel right now." Karoline reached for her remote and turned on the television. She flipped to a major news network where two anchors were discussing last night's debate. Behind them was a graphic that read, "The Comeback, Leavitt versus Crockett," with a freeze frame of Jasmine's shocked expression. "It was the moment of the night," said a female anchor named Patty Miller. "When Congresswoman Crockett dismissed Leavitt's knowledge as textbook, no one expected such a powerful response." The male anchor nodded. "Let's play the clip again for those who might have missed it." Karoline watched herself on screen, delivering the comeback that was now making headlines. The network had added dramatic music underneath the clip, making it feel even more intense. When it ended, the camera cut to a panel of political analysts. "In my 30 years covering politics, I've rarely seen someone recover from a takedown like that," said an older analyst named Bill Peterson. "Congresswoman Crockett has built her reputation on being unbeatable in debates. Last night changed that perception completely." Across town, Jasmine Crockett was having a very different morning. She sat in her office with her team, the mood somber. Sam Collins, her press secretary, was on the phone trying to schedule damage control interviews. Two other staffers were monitoring social media and news coverage. "It's bad," said Carol, one of her advisors, looking up from her laptop. "Every major outlet is running the clip. It's been viewed 17 million times already on social platforms." Jasmine sighed heavily. "What are people saying?" "It's mixed," Carol replied carefully. "Your supporters are saying you had an off night, that one moment doesn't define your career. But others are..." "Are what?" Jasmine pressed. "They're saying it exposed something. That you're out of touch with regular people, too focused on Washington politics." Jasmine stood up and walked to the window. "Schedule a press conference for this afternoon. We need to get ahead of this narrative." Back at the television studio, the production team for American Discourse was gathered in a conference room. The mood was jubilant. Lisa Morgan, the executive producer, stood at the head of the table with a wide smile. "The overnight ratings just came in," she announced. "We had our highest viewership in 5 years. The network executives are thrilled." The room erupted in applause and cheers. "The clips from last night have been viewed over 20 million times across all platforms," added a young social media coordinator. "We've gained 300,000 new followers since the show aired." "Great work, everyone," Lisa said. "Now let's talk about follow-up coverage. The network wants us to do a special segment tonight analyzing what happened. Greg, are you available?" Greg Peters nodded. "Absolutely. This is the kind of television moment people will be talking about for years." By midday, the story had expanded beyond political news. Morning talk shows, entertainment programs, and even sports commentators were discussing the comeback. Memes and remixes of the moment flooded the internet. Late-night comedians were already writing jokes for their evening shows. At a coffee shop in downtown, two strangers discussed the debate while waiting in line. "Did you see that political show last night?" asked a man in a business suit. "Everyone's seen it by now," replied a woman in workout clothes. My kids were showing me the memes this morning, and they don't even follow politics." "I've never seen someone shut down like that on live TV," the man said, shaking his head in amazement. "Crockett looked like she'd been hit by a truck. Honestly, it was satisfying to watch," the woman added. Politicians get away with talking down to people all the time. Nice to see someone call it out. At 2:01 p.m., Jasmine Crockett held her press conference. She stood at a podium with the seal of her office, flanked by several staff members. Camera flashes lit up the room as she began to speak. "I want to address last night's debate on American discourse," she began, her voice steady. "While there has been much focus on one exchange, I stand by my record of service to my constituents and this nation," she continued. "Ms. Leavitt is a skilled debater, and she made some points that resonated with viewers. That's how democracy works. We have robust discussions about important issues. Sometimes those discussions get heated." A reporter called out, "Congresswoman, do you regret your comments about Ms. Leavitt's understanding being limited to textbooks?" Jasmine paused briefly. "I regret that my words could be interpreted as dismissive. That wasn't my intent. I was trying to highlight the value of hands-on experience in government, which I believe is important." Another reporter asked, "Will you be reaching out to Ms. Leavitt personally?" "Our offices have been in contact," Jasmine replied vaguely. "Now, if we could move on to discussing actual policy matters." But the reporters weren't ready to move on. More questions about the debate followed, with fewer about her policy positions. After 20 minutes, Sam Collins stepped in to end the press conference. Meanwhile, Karoline was having a very different experience. She had accepted an invitation to appear on Morning America, one of the country's most watched morning shows. The host, Judy Baker, welcomed her warmly. "Karoline, welcome to the show. I think it's fair to say you're having quite a day." Karoline smiled modestly. "It's been surprising. I didn't expect this level of attention from one debate." "Let's talk about that moment," Judy said. "When Congresswoman Crockett made that comment about textbooks, what went through your mind?" "Honestly, I felt it represented something larger than just our debate," Karoline replied. "There's this idea that regular citizens can't understand how government works, that only insiders have the right answers. I disagree with that fundamentally." "Your response clearly resonated with people," Judy noted. "Why do you think that is?" "I think Americans are tired of being talked down to by elected officials," Karoline said. "They want representatives who respect their intelligence and who deliver actual results, not just explanations for why things aren't working." The interview continued for 15 minutes, with Karoline staying poised and thoughtful throughout. When it ended, the studio audience gave her a standing ovation. By evening, political commentators were discussing the broader implications of the viral moment. On a cable news show, a panel debated what it meant for both women's futures. "This is a career-defining moment for Karoline Leavitt," said analyst Mary Wilson. "She's gone from being a rising voice to a household name overnight." "And for Congresswoman Crockett?" asked the host. "It's a wake-up call," Mary replied. "She's been uncontested in her district for years. This reminds her that voters are watching, and they respond to authenticity over authority." Another analyst, Joe Adams, added, "What's most interesting is how this moment transcended politics. People who never watch political debates are sharing this clip. It's become a cultural moment as much as a political one." As the day came to a close, both women reflected privately on how their lives had changed in just 24 hours. Jasmine sat alone in her home office, reviewing the day's coverage on her tablet. Her phone rang. It was a senior party official calling to discuss messaging strategy moving forward. She took a deep breath before answering. Across town, Karoline declined an invitation to a celebratory dinner with friends. Instead, she sat at her desk, writing notes for upcoming appearances. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Don't let this change you. Remember why you got into this in the first place." She smiled and texted back, "I won't. And I do." Outside both their windows, news vans were already setting up for morning shots, a sign that this story was far from over. The political landscape had shifted in a single television moment, and the aftershocks were just beginning. 1 week after the debate that changed everything, Karoline Leavitt stood backstage at a major political conference. She checked her watch, 5 minutes until she was due to speak. The organizers had called 3 days ago, upgrading her from a small side panel to the main stage. The reason was obvious. Everyone wanted to see the woman who had stunned Jasmine Crockett on national television. "We're ready for you, Ms. Leavitt," said a young event coordinator. "The room is packed." Karoline nodded and took a deep breath. When she walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. Many people stood, phones raised to capture the moment. She saw several textbook knowledge matters signs in the crowd, a slogan that had sprung up online after her comeback. "Thank you all so much," she began, waiting for the cheers to die down. "I'm honored to be here today to talk about something more important than any one debate or viral moment, the future of our country." For the next 30 minutes, she spoke about her vision for America. The audience listened attentively, giving her standing ovations at several points. After her speech, a line of people waited to meet her, many asking for selfies and autographs. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett was adapting to her new reality. The Congresswoman sat in a meeting with her expanded communications team. After the debate, her office had hired 2 new staff members to handle crisis management. "The latest polling shows a 6-point drop in your approval rating," reported Sam Collins, showing her a chart on his tablet. "But we're seeing signs of recovery in the past 2 days." Jasmine nodded. "And the fundraising numbers?" "Down for the first 3 days after the debate, but picking up again," said Carol. "The good news is that your core supporters are still with you. They see this as a minor setback, not a defining moment." "What about the challenger in your district?" Jasmine asked. "Any movement there?" Sam hesitated before answering. "Ellen Barker has seen a surge in donations. She's using the debate clip in her campaign emails, suggesting it shows you're out of touch with constituents." Jasmine sighed. For 12 years, she had easily won re-election. Now, for the first time, she faced a serious challenge. "Here's our strategy moving forward," Sam continued. "We're focusing on your legislative accomplishments. The highway project, the hospital funding, the new jobs program. Concrete things you've delivered for your district. And we've secured 3 town halls in the next month," added Carol. "Friendly settings where you can reconnect with voters directly." Jasmine nodded. "Good. And what about media appearances?" "We're being selective," Sam replied. "No debate formats for now, only one-on-one interviews with friendly hosts, and we've prepared answers for when they inevitably ask about the Leavitt exchange." Back at the television network, American Discourse was enjoying its newfound popularity. The show's ratings had doubled since the famous debate. Greg Peters had become something of a celebrity himself, appearing on other shows to discuss the night that had gone viral. In the production office, Lisa Morgan was on a video call with network executives. "We want to capitalize on this momentum," said a network vice president. "What about a rematch? Crockett and Leavitt round 2? Lisa shook her head. "We've reached out to both camps. Leavitt is open to it, but Crockett's team has declined. They say her schedule is too full right now." "Keep trying," the executive urged. "In the meantime, book them separately if you can. Viewers will tune in either way." 2 weeks after the debate, Karoline received a surprising phone call. She was in her apartment preparing for a radio interview when her phone rang with an unknown number. "Hello, this is Karoline," she answered. "Ms. Leavitt, this is Senator Kate Johnson," said a familiar voice. The senior senator was one of the most powerful people in Washington. "Senator," Karoline replied, surprised. "It's an honor to speak with you." "I've been watching your recent appearances with interest," the senator said, "particularly that debate with Congresswoman Crockett. You handled yourself impressively." "Thank you, Senator. I'll get right to the point," Senator Johnson continued. "My committee is holding hearings next month on government transparency and accountability. Given your recent public statements on these issues, I'd like to invite you to testify." Karoline's heart raced. This was an enormous opportunity, a chance to share her ideas at the highest levels of government. "I would be honored, Senator," she replied. "Good. My office will be in touch with the details," Senator Johnson said. "And Karoline, between us, that comeback was long overdue. Jasmine has been talking down to people for years." The call ended, leaving Karoline stunned. The ripple effects of that one television moment were still expanding. 3 weeks after the debate, Jasmine Crockett was working late in her office when her assistant knocked on the door. "Congresswoman, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's important." "Who is it?" Jasmine asked, not looking up from her papers. "Karoline Leavitt." Jasmine's head snapped up. After a moment of shock, she nodded. "Send her in." Karoline walked into the office, looking professional in a simple black suit. The two women had not seen each other since the night of the debate. "Congresswoman, thank you for seeing me," Karoline said. "Ms. Leavitt," Jasmine replied coolly. "This is unexpected." "I'll get right to the point," Karoline said, sitting down across from Jasmine. "I'm testifying at Senator Johnson's hearings next month on government transparency." "I'm aware," Jasmine said. "My office received the witness list yesterday." "Then you know I'll be discussing ways to make government more accountable to citizens," Karoline continued, "including some criticisms of current practices." Jasmine's expression hardened. "Is this a courtesy call to warn me you'll be attacking my record again?" Karoline shook her head. "Just the opposite. I think there's an opportunity here for both of us. I'm listening. The hearing will get significant media attention. If we present a united front on at least some reforms, it would be powerful. We come from different perspectives, but surely we can agree that government should be more transparent and accessible to the people it serves." Jasmine was silent for a long moment. "You want us to work together? After what happened?" "That was a debate." "This is governance," Karoline replied simply. "I think voters would be impressed to see that we can move past a viral moment and focus on actual solutions." To her surprise, Jasmine slowly nodded. "It would certainly change the narrative. For both of us," Karoline added. "You'd show you're not the out-of-touch insider some have portrayed you as, and I'd show I can do more than deliver good comebacks on TV." A hint of a smile appeared on Jasmine's face. "You did deliver a good one. I underestimated you. It won't happen again." "I hope not," Karoline said, "because I think we could accomplish more as occasional allies than as constant opponents." By the time Karoline left the Congresswoman's office an hour later, they had outlined several areas where they could potentially collaborate. No one in Washington would have predicted this development, least of all the two women themselves. 1 month after the debate, the major networks carried Senator Johnson's committee hearing live. Political analysts were shocked to see Karoline Leavitt and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett presenting joint recommendations on government transparency reforms. The image of them sitting side by side, nodding as each other spoke, quickly replaced the debate clip as the defining visual of their relationship. In the committee room, Senator Johnson leaned toward her microphone. "This is a refreshing display of bipartisanship. Ms. Leavitt, Congresswoman Crockett, what prompted this collaboration?" Karoline and Jasmine exchanged a look. Jasmine nodded slightly, letting Karoline answer. "Sometimes, Senator," Karoline said, "the most important lessons don't come from textbooks or from insider experience. They come from being willing to listen and learn from each other." The audience chuckled at the reference to their famous exchange, but there was no tension in it. Now, what had begun as a moment of conflict had evolved into something more constructive. As cameras flashed around them, both women knew that their viral moment had changed the trajectory of their careers, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. In politics, as in life, sometimes the most dramatic confrontations lead to the most unexpected alliances.